Most of us introduce ourselves with a title. I'm a coach, I'm a banker, I'm a podcaster. The problem with this is that the moment you do that, you're putting yourself in the same box as everyone else with that title. So our guest today knows exactly that feeling. So our guest is Simon Alexander Ong, the best-selling author of Energize, an international keynote speaker and award-winning coach. And for years, he chased the job titles that he thought would define his success until he realized that real success and true differentiation comes from embracing your whole self. And that includes your story, your skills, and your creativity. So in this episode, we explore how breaking free from the labels and showing people what makes you unlike anyone else can transform you from just another entrepreneur or just another professional into an actual brand. Let's dive in. Every Edits History interview runs about 60 minutes, but only 2/3 make it into the final cut. The rest, the 33% that I left behind, actually lives in the Annotations newsletter. This is where I share the insights and step-by-step strategies that happened after the mic was turned off. Think of this as your companion guide to the episode. You can subscribe to the Annotations newsletter at cheryllau.com/email. Again, the link is cheryllau.com/email. Simon, before this conversation, I watched a number of your interviews on YouTube, and there was one particular thing that you said which really caught my attention. And you talked about how when you focus on not just what you do, but who you are and who you're becoming, then that's when you stop being boxed in. And specifically, you say that that is how you become a brand.
Yeah.
So for you, Simon, I really want to know, take us back to a time when you were boxed in by whether it's your own expectations or a job title or external pressures. Like, what was going on at that point in time?
So I grew up with this mistaken belief that success in life would be determined by my job title. So being boxed in by titles such as being a banker, being a lawyer, being a doctor, being an accountant. And so I was striving to fit into one of those boxes. Which of those would be deemed successful, which of those would bring pride to my family. And I quickly realized once I started, for me, it was in the financial services sector. That wasn't what success was about. I started at the worst possible time. It was 12 months before the financial crisis started in 2007, and it was with a company called Lehman Brothers. So that was a very volatile start to my career. And it acted as a catalyst in a way. This crisis happening made me begin to question what I was doing and whether this was what I wanted to do long term. And that process, even though it was tough at the time, I think it was necessary. Something I talk about in the book, that it acts as a catalyst for it being the longest journey that we humans make, which is the inches from our heads to our hearts. And that was the journey I took. And it was really a journey of self-awareness. What was my version of success? And was I doing something that was aligned to that? And I went on this big self-exploration journey to really understand what my strengths were, what brought me joy, and what I really wanted to do beyond some of these titles that boxed me in.
And when you fast forward to now, which you are not in that sector anymore, you are now an author, you are a speaker, you are a YouTuber. Your work looks very different today. But I really want to do a quick compare and contrast. So back then, you found yourself boxed into certain titles. But when you started on this new season or line of work, did you find yourself boxed in again? Did those similar patterns creep in as well?
Initially at the start, because when I left the corporate world, the thing that I wanted to do, after I did some research, I went onto I attended some events and seminars, spoke to people ahead of me, it was coaching. And I said to myself, if I could build a successful practice as a coach, then I'm happy, I'm fulfilled. That was all I had in my mind. But as I started on the journey, I found I had other useful skills. I found that people liked other things that I did. And so that focus, if you will, began to evolve. It started off as coaching, and then I started speaking as well. And then it was interviewing, and then it was writing books, and as you said earlier, it's now YouTube and lots of other things. And what I realized is that when we embrace our full self and the talents and skills we have, you cannot box yourself into one thing, because we're all multi-talented. Just speaking to you now, Cheryl, what comes to my mind is the analogy of the rock and Apple. If you think about Apple, the company, when it first started and when it was classified on the stock exchange, you would box Apple in as a technology company. But fast forward to today, would you still box them in as a technology company, given they do phones, they do televisions, they do watches, they do so many other things now than just computers. And so some people would refer to them as a lifestyle brand. They're a brand in and of itself. And the same thing as The Rock. The Rock established himself as a wrestler. So that was his boxed in. The Rock is a wrestler. That's what he was known as. But if you fast forward to today, he still wrestles, he acts, he directs, he produces, he's involved in lots of different business ventures. He's a brand. And so what I realized is that when you're a brand, you're embracing and embodying all the things that make you, that make you different, that make you a story. And that's when I realized that when I broke out of not just the corporate world of being boxed into a title, but also in the business world from being boxed into one thing, that's how you become different to the majority in your industry.
I wonder, for the listeners who are listening right now, I feel like intellectually they're thinking, okay, Simon, I see the point here. I get it. But, and I'm trying to think what their buts is. I feel like there's some buts that's coming up for them. Maybe it could look like, okay, but I've been in this job for 15 years, or, but I really don't think I'm talented in anything else. But it could be insert any other train of thought here. For you, what was your but?
I think the first but, and I guess his reference is breaking out of corporate world and going to entrepreneurship. The first but was no one else has done this that I knew in my circle. My family had always worked for someone. They'd worked in a company. All of my friends that I graduated with, all of my colleagues, they were all working for someone in a company. So my first but was nobody has done this. Who do I learn from? How do I know this is going to work? That was my big but in that moment. And actually, in hindsight, what I realized is that the reason it's a but is because your environment isn't the one that reflects where you want to be. And so if I had to advise my younger self or the person going through that journey again, it would be the first step you should take now is to change your environment to one that reflects where you want to be. And that's what I did. I sought out mentors. My first mentors were books. The people that wrote books that talked about things that resonated with me, they were my first mentors. And then it would be people I met at events, people I heard speak on stage, people I listened to or watched on YouTube or podcasts. They would be my first unofficial mentors. And it gave me the insight, the ideas and the wisdom to then pursue those things that I wanted to pursue. So that was I would say, the first but there. And it was very much to do with the environment. The second but when it came to coaching and I guess all the other things that I now get to do was the lack of resources. But I don't have the resources to do this. And I would be looking at people ahead of me and I would be, as we all do, I would be comparing myself to them and saying, I should be doing this. Why am I not doing this? Why is my output not as high as this person? And then again, I realized that I had to choose one thing, be good at it. And then if I choose a second or third thing, work out how to manage that with what I already had on my plate. Because the difference was that they had teams. At the beginning, it was just me. And so it was very difficult to compare myself because we had very different setups. And so that was my second but there.
Simon, your personal situation is interesting because your wife, Lori, is also in a similar line of work. Which one of you started in the coaching and the writing and the speaking space first among the two of you?
I started first, so I made the jump first. And at the beginning, before I could afford to have a team, she was the one that did the photos and the videos at the events I spoke at. And it was that, I think, that gave her the energy, it gave her the insight to kind of reflect on her own path and think, actually, I think I want to, try something new as well. And she then moved into marketing from finance and then marketing into what she now gets to do today. And I think that, again, is evidence of the power of your environment. That the environment gives you a certain energy and it gets you to think differently. It gets you to see your world through a new lens. And, just touching on my wife, actually, I think one thing that we don't talk enough about when we think about environment is who your partner is. And I think it's one of the greatest life hacks. You know, who your life partner is can either push you towards a new level of your growth or it can hold you back, because they will be the person that you will spend the most time with, apart from yourself, of course. They will be the person that you will spend most of your time with. So if they are someone that encourages you, supports you, and challenges you, then you are going to grow and become a better person. But if there's someone that holds you back, gets you questioning your decisions, then that's going to be a very tough journey for you.
Ooh, that really hits home for me, because about 3 years ago, when I decided to pursue my business entrepreneurial journey full time, I for context, for the listeners' context, I am married to my husband for 3 years now. I told him I am a little worried, like, can I really make this happen? And although he is not an entrepreneur himself, he supported me by saying that, hey, like, don't worry, at least if worse comes to worse, at least I am still working and I can support you while you build and pursue your goals and dreams. And I didn't really realize how pivotal or how grounding that was for me at the time, because I was still so frantic about, can I really make this work? But you know, hearing you say that your life partner is a really good life
It's one of the most powerful choices you're going to make. And I think people underestimate that choice. When they support you, when they've got your back, you feel like you are unstoppable. And this is what I think is lacking in so many relationships, is that for a relationship to really work, and it's tougher today than it was in the past, because we have so many more options available when it comes to the dating scene and how we find relationships. But if you can operate as a team, which means you mutually respect each other, you realize one of you has better strengths in some things and you have better strengths in other areas, and you can find common ground despite your differences, then when you move forward as a team, you're able to accomplish so much more. And, you know, relationships do get tested. You know, you go through your bad patches, whether that's certain life events you have to respond to, whether that's starting a family. You know, you have a lot of these things that get thrown onto you. And for me, that's a real test of how you are as a team. And if you work well as a team, I think you have a very good foundation for the future.
I really love that. Before we move forward to another topic I really want to talk about, another very nosy question, don't mind me. Because you and your wife are doing similar work, I mean, both of you have a very successful YouTube channel, for example. Does comparisons ever happen? Like, does that ever happen at all between you two? Like a friendly competition, perhaps?
Well, there's a word that comes to my mind, which is something I shared on social media recently called mudita, which is a Sanskrit word for feeling joy for the success of others, which is the opposite of the German word called Schadenfreude. And for us, it's really about championing each other on. And so when she does well, I think we win. When I do well, we win. When none of us do well, we learn. And I think having that approach is so healthy, because again, even though you can have some friendly competition, you want to be careful that it doesn't become too competitive, because again, you're operating as a team. And the moment it becomes competitive, it's me against you. And I think this is what then destroys a lot of relationships. When it's me against you, then suddenly you operate very differently. So for us, it's just like championing each other on, and then seeing what we can learn from each other and helping each other out.
I really love that, because I think, although I don't have a friendly competition with my partner per se, because he's not in the same line of work as me, I do have a number of friends, close friends, who are in similar paths as me. And I have found that, you know, I will admit that I have had envy towards my friends before. But what I've learned is that, honestly, when they win, that's a win for me too, if anything. And I think it took some time for me to really feel less affected when I see the success of others, and actually genuinely feel happy for them. It took some time, but I think it honestly puts me in a much better mood when I'm happy for other people.
Yeah. And it's a human, you know, it's what makes us human. Especially in today's world where, you know, we all switch on our phones, we check social media. you cannot help but look at what other people are doing. And yeah, I do it from time to time still. And I think what's important to understand is that there's two ways to look at it. You can look at it from the point of comparison, or you can look at it from the point of inspiration. And they're very different reactions. So comparison can create envy and jealousy, but inspiration, for me, creates more productivity. So if I look at someone for inspiration, instead of saying, why is he or she achieving this and I'm not, I also, well, what is he or she doing that I can do better at? And that's coming from a place of inspiration, not comparison. Because then you're using their wins and their successes to inspire you and think, well, how can I be better? What can I try different that I haven't done before? And for me, that's far more productive.
I love how it's reframed to when you look at someone else, what are they doing or what do they have or what have they created that you might want to create for yourself, and letting that guide you to do better or try something else that lets you create the same results that they've created for themselves. Which actually reminds me of something that you've shared in another interview, I believe. I recall that there was an anecdote you were sharing. And you said when you would come down from stage, people would come up to you and say, oh, Simon, I love your energy. If I could only have a small percentage of that energy, I could accomplish so much more. And it seems like that is a sentiment that you get from a lot of your audience members. And your energy in particular is something that people are clearly drawn to, and you're known for your energy, right? Do you ever feel pressured to have this image of you are full of energy, and energy, as you said in your book, there's different types of energy, but do you ever feel that pressure to have it all together?
I think anybody who is in the public eye, and especially when you are a content creator and you are putting content out there and you build an audience, you build followers, and you build people that kind of follow your every move, of course there's going to be some pressure. But for me, I think what is more important, something I've come to embrace more in recent years, is the focus on being authentic. I think that's far more important, especially for your brand. So for me, I'm as honest as I can be to people. You know, when people ask me a question and say, you know, you look like you've got it all together, you look like doing amazing, you're crushing it. I'm going through a lot of challenges right now. I'm honest with them. I just say, you know, I'm also going through challenges as well. You know, we're all human. Whatever stage you are in your journey, you will have challenges. You know, if you look at a business journey, when you first start, your very first challenge is, how do I get my first client? How do I make my first sale? And then as you grow, your next challenge becomes, how do I hire a team? How do I hire properly? How do I build a good culture? As you grow again, your next challenge is, how do I scale? How do I build into international territories? And so every level you go through in your journey, you are going to face challenges. And so I'm keen to articulate that to people, to show them that, you know, just like you, wherever you are on your journey, and you might be making it up as you go along, and you might be winging it, and you have no idea if it's going to work out or not. I also feel the same. You know, I'm taking on some projects. Some I have a feeling it's going to do well, and some I have no idea if it's going to succeed or not. But that's kind of part of life. I mean, that's the magic of life.
That reminds me of, I feel like I'm pulling quotes you've said out of my head right now. But there was this particular quote you said, I believe it's about having a vision so compelling enough, so that's so compelling that
it pulls you forward. It's like a magnetic force. Yeah.
Yes, that.
And that's what I think stops a lot of people. You know, when they say they know what they want to do. You know, a lot of people at the beginning of every year will have resolutions. This is a year I'm going to change jobs. This is a year I'm going to start this project. But they don't begin. And in many cases, the reason is this fear of judgment. It's this fear of how I'm going to look in front of other people. But what actually is missing is clarity of vision. Because when the vision is so clear, so magnetic, so compelling, all of those fears, all of those concerns become minimal in comparison to that vision.
And I feel like that ties in nicely with just now when you talked about authenticity, because when I think back in my own journey, when I was trying so hard to portray myself in a certain way on the internet to people I went to school with back in the day, it wasn't magnetizing. It was repelling, if anything. And I would want to just delete or archive whatever I posted. Whereas now that I have a lot more, a deeper sense of self-appreciation and groundedness and assuredness in myself, I think that I would like to think that the way I come across is a
Yeah.
lot more magnetic to people, or at least people can feel the sincerity
Yeah.
in my words. And that leads me to a question about one thing that you talk a lot about, and I believe this comes from one of the chapters in your book, in the later chapters about creative energy.
Yeah.
You shared that to learn to admit that there are people who know more than you, that is something that requires a level of humility. You wrote that in that
Absolutely.
chapter.
Yeah.
But for creators and entrepreneurs, a lot of marketing gurus have told them you need to be seen as an expert from day one and build authority. And now there's this balance that they're trying to grapple with. On one hand, they feel like, but maybe I am still learning. Maybe I am still building the skill sets that I need to build this brand or business. But on the other hand, I need to be seen as a certain way. What would you say to someone who's in that awkward, messy middle right now?
Well, first of all, if you are someone who's aspiring to be a creator or entrepreneur, you're never going to be an expert from day one. You only become an expert by doing the thing. You know, you can overthink, you can plan, you can strategize, but unless you're doing the thing, you're never going to become an expert. You know, if you want to be a coach, coach. If you want to be a speaker, speak. If you want to be a creator, create. You become the expert by doing the thing, not thinking about the thing. And I would say what is more important than being an expert from the beginning is knowing your story. What is your story that is going to differentiate you from every other person? You know, when I speak to entrepreneurs or even I mentor younger coaches or speakers, I say to them, the first opportunity you are going to get to sell yourself and to share your story is when you go to an event where nobody knows you. And the first question they ask you is, what do you do? What do you do is the first chance you get to sell yourself. Most of us blow it. And the reason we blow it is because we introduce ourselves with a title. I'm a coach. I'm a banker. I'm a chef. I'm an analyst. I'm an entrepreneur. And it tells nothing. It tells someone nothing. Because immediately you've boxed yourself in. You've boxed yourself in with this title. But if you tell them your story, your origin story, why you're doing what you're doing, suddenly they get curious. They say to you, tell me more. How do you do that? Do you have an example of someone you've worked with recently? And so by telling stories, you're enticing people to want to know more, to invite them into your world. But when you respond with a title, you cut that chance off. Because when we use a title, we are now making ourselves the same as everyone else. How many of us know other coaches, speakers, and entrepreneurs? We probably know lots of other coaches, speakers, and entrepreneurs. But how many people do we know that has your exact story, your origin story, the reason why you're doing what you're doing? Only you. And so that's how we stand out. That's how we start to build a reputation, is by making ourselves one of a kind. So that's what I would focus more of your time on. Knowing your story, knowing your origin story, why you're doing what you're doing, and the expert stuff will come as you build.
And put in the reps.
Absolutely.
If you want to coach, coach. If you want to speak, speak. Just exactly like what you said. And actually, that reminds me of a year ago, you were in Singapore and you did a author talk with
the Saturday Book Club.
Saturday Book Club. And I was in the audience, actually.
Small world.
I was there, and I did not get a chance to get you to sign the book or get a photo of you because I had to run off right after the session. But there was one thing you shared that day that I still remember. And I think it was the reason why I decided to buy your book at the end of the session. And it ties in nicely with what you just said about your story is what differentiates you. Because I think what really stayed with me from that session is you described how for one of your book launch events or some sort of event, you paired it with a culinary experience.
Yes, the 6-course dining.
Yeah. And as soon as you told the audience about how you paired your book with a different dish or a sensory dish experience, I was like, this is so creative. And so I think to your point about your story is what differentiates you, I also think the way you think or the way your creativity is also something that can separate you as well.
Absolutely. And I think even more important now, because as artificial intelligence continues to evolve and advance in its capacity, one thing it can never replace is human creativity. The ability to connect various strands that are seemingly unconnected and make them connected. And this goes again back to the idea of brand. If you box yourself in with a title, you're known just for that. But when you can access all parts of you, for me, it was my network, my creativity, and the fact I've got a book. How do I bring those three things together to create something completely unique, never been done before, in order to tell people a story? So whether it's through the dining experience, whether it's through the cocktail, whether it's through one of the first book launches in the metaverse, and so on, then what happens is that people get an insight into how I think through the experience that they get to try.
Are you right now, Simon, building anything that is really stretching your creativity? What are you working on these days?
Well, I would say, connected to what we just touched on, one thing I'm currently exploring is developing a board game based on my work. So if you can imagine a board game where you might have a deck of cards, with each card could be a question, which opens up your self-awareness or gets you to be a bit vulnerable. It could also be a theory or an idea or a quote. And you turn it into a game, but the reason we kind of look into making a game is it makes it accessible to anybody. So you can involve your children, you can involve your parents, you can involve your friends, and you can play a game that not is only fun, but also stimulates your thinking and develops you as a person as well. And that's come through someone I know in my network who's building a business based on board games. And that's how the creativity forms. Going back to what makes us different, I think one of the key things I've focused my energy on since I started in the business world is making sure I have a diverse range of people, not just people who do what I do, but a diverse range of people, because that diversity is powerful. It feeds your mind with ideas that other people in your industry would not have, just because you're exposing your mind to people doing amazing things, but just in different sectors.
What is something that you might have pulled from your past life, maybe from your financial days? Yeah. Have you ever pulled anything from that part of your life to your current work today, years later?
I mean, the obvious one is work hard. And I think that's something that's been a strand throughout my life, whether it's my Asian upbringing to working in the financial services sector, which is all about work ethic, to what I would say attention to detail. Because when you're in finance, you're working with lots of spreadsheets, you're working with lots of numbers. Attention to detail is key. One wrong number can cost you thousands, if not millions of dollars. And so that attention to detail has come into the work I do now. So when we do a launch, when we shoot a video, when we're editing a video, when we're thinking about a strategy for getting a message out there, we're always looking into the detail of as much of the data we can and what it's telling us and how we can adapt to that.
On that note about, your upbringing, I were to ask your family or maybe a parent, what does Simon do? How would they explain what you do? Do they understand what you do today?
Well, it's interesting. My wife's dad, my father-in-law, summarizes what I do as Simon kicks people up the bum. Very crudely, but essentially that's what he summarizes it as. My dad would probably just say I'm an author. He doesn't know too much beyond that. But I think he appreciates a lot more now what I do. It was actually very tough, again, to be open with those listening. It was actually very tough mentally to transition from working for someone to working for myself. Again, because I knew my family had invested so much into my education, going to university, and for them to kind of think about their child now giving up that investment to go into something that is not guaranteed. You're moving from something where you get a stable salary, you get a bonus, you get holidays and all the things that come with working in a company, to now choosing a path where nothing's guaranteed. And my father at the time, very strict Asian father, would always be performance and results focused. So it was more about how much you got paid. Are you getting paid enough? How are you going to survive? So it's very much on those lines, where I knew if my mom was still alive, she would be probably more on the emotional side and say, well, do you have the right support around you? Well done on getting the job. And so there was that pressure of not only having to make the jump, but also having to openly communicate that to my father and my relatives. And that was tough. That was a mentally tough challenge. And I think knowing that, I gave them a lagged experience of my journey. And I remember my dad at the time was working outside of the country, and he would call me and we would have regular conversations over Skype at the time. And he would say, how's the job going? And this was at the time where I was now out of a job and pursuing my dreams in the business world. And I would be buying myself time. I would say things such as, the job's going okay. I mean, the economy's a bit tough at the moment and I'm just hoping I get a promotion next year. And I'll just be buying myself time. And only once I started to get some success, some things I could show, I would gradually tell him, I'm looking at a new career. I'm looking to start my own business. And I think it was when he came to the book launch, so I reserved the front seats for my family and close friends, that he really got to see what I was doing. And that for me was a special moment.
Simon, a lot of our listeners would identify as either a child of immigrants or from an Asian background. And so I think a lot of them can relate to your experiences of, you're having a strict Asian dad, for example. And right now, I think for a lot of them, they still carry a lot of, I don't know whether it's a sense of heaviness or a sense of guilt of, my parents have given me so much. I need to continue down this certain path because I don't want to disappoint my family for everything they've poured into me. And I'm saying this from my own point of view. And so this is hitting very close to home for me right now. For the listener right now who does have that inkling of the current path that I'm in isn't where I want to be in the next 5 to 10 years, but there's still, whether it's responsibilities, practical, financial, caregiving responsibilities, or even that sense of guilt of, this is the path that my family has built for me, whatever their reason for flip-flopping between the decision to quit or to stay, what is a perspective you can offer them to help them make a decision? Not leaning so much one or the other, but just a perspective or a question they can ask themselves.
Well, one thing I would say right now, the short answer is don't quit yet. The longer answer is the mistake most people make is they're in one position. Let's just, for argument's sake, say you're in a job you don't enjoy and you have dreams of starting a business. They think I have to quit one and start the other cold. And that's the biggest mistake you can make. Because what happens is that if you quit one with no foundation for the next part of your journey, you will have the energy of desperation. You will have the energy of I need the cash, I need the money. And people can sense that, they can feel it. What you want to do instead, which is what I did, is I reframed the relationship I had with my job. For a lot of us, the reason we get drained of energy, we feel exhausted, we feel tired from our job, is we see it as a dead end. We see it as there's nothing beyond this. I'm going into something I hate every week and I just feel completely drained of energy. I can't wait for the weekend. I can't wait for my next holiday. But you want to reframe that relationship. You want to see your job or whatever it is that is paying you right now as an investor. So it's giving you funds to invest how you like. The question is, how are you investing that cash? Are you wasting it by spending it on things or using it for things that are not aligned to where you want to be? Or are you investing it wisely? So what I did is I saw myself as a CEO of my brand at that point. So by seeing myself as a CEO of that brand, I said, okay, that capital I'm getting from my job, I'm going to invest it in courses. I'm going to invest it by going into events. I'm going to invest it into mentorship, into books, all of this stuff to learn about business. And that gave me the foundation to begin growing while I was still in the job. And then from there, I was able to get my first few clients, again, while I was still in a job. And so I got myself into a position where I gave myself a nice dilemma. So I got myself 3 paying clients, but I knew I could not get a 4th. If I got a 4th, not only would my coaching suffer, but my day job would suffer as well, because I could only coach on weekends and weekdays in the evenings. And so this was this dilemma that took me around 4 to 6 months of back and forth to decide if I should quit or not. And then I did. But the difference is I already had some momentum. I had some clients already. I'd spent time building a website. I'd spent time building my network. So it wasn't like I was going into it cold. So my advice would be start now, but don't quit yet until you've got some sort of foundation.
Oh, I did not realize that there was a point in your journey where you were doing both at the same time.
Yeah.
I did not realize that.
I was kind of living this double life for a little bit before it got to this point where I had to make a choice. And it was either I could stop at just 3 clients and a day job, or I could quit and see just how far I could take this.
And because as someone who also quote unquote side hustled
Yeah.
for a number of years before I pursued this full time, one of the most common questions I got back then was, how are you doing it all, like both? How are you doing it all at the same time? And I'm sure you've gotten a fair share of that variation of that question
Yeah.
as well. Simon, how are you doing your job and coaching? And of course, you reached a point where you had to choose one or
Yeah.
the other. But during that time frame where you were doing both and balancing both, what were tools, systems, habits, energy that allowed you to do it all?
Well, first of all, if you really want something, you will make time for it. You will make it happen. Just ask any parent who has to balance a job with parenting. They make it happen. And the same way, that was my mindset. I knew I wanted to make it happen because the dream and the vision was so compelling, so exciting, so magnetic. I would find the time, the minutes, the hours, the days to make it happen. Now, from an energy point of view, because I knew what I wanted to work towards and what I didn't want anymore, I became super efficient at my job. So I would get everything done before midday even got around. I would make sure that if something took me 1 week, I would say 2 weeks. So I would be buying myself more time so I could get the stuff done and give myself the energy to still focus on the thing I wanted to do longer term. So it was all about managing my time and energy more efficiently. And it's the same now, just in a different way. You know, when you have a child, when you drop them off at school, you know to pick them up again. And when you pick them up, you spend the evening and weekends with them. So I've only got a small window of opportunity to get work done. And what happens is it forces you to prioritize. If I've only got 6 hours to get things done before I have to go pick up my daughter from school, what am I saying yes to? And what can I decline or I can outsource? You just have to become more efficient with how you use your time.
It sounds like balancing it all, specifically balancing a full-time job,
Yeah.
allow you to build up certain skills, like becoming more efficient at certain
Yeah.
tasks. And then that can be something that you can carry over when you did pursue your business full-time.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that you can learn a lot of very foundational skills during your time as a side hustler. I think there's a bit of a negative connotation on side hustling because people think, oh, you're not serious about your business. But I think that is a runway for
Yeah.
many people, and where you really get to build up the muscle, the resilience, the character that you need when you actually do go full time.
For me, it was very important because I come from a very risk-averse culture. You know, it's like, you know, don't take the risk, it's uncertain, you don't know if it's going to work out. And so for me, it was important to build some sort of feedback loop on if this could work or not. And once I started seeing some people were interested in what I had to offer, that was a good sign for me to see value in what I was doing.
I want to do a quick compare and contrast.
Yeah.
Compared to the early days of starting your business versus today, what differences would you identify in your calendar? How does your calendars look different?
I would say the key difference, and I'm sure anyone who's been on this journey can relate, is that when you are at the beginning of your journey, you have to say yes to almost everything because you don't know what's going to work out. You want to plant seeds, you want to increase your luck surface area. So you want to show up as best you can. So you want to say yes to as many things. But as you build, as you become more well known, as you get more inbound inquiries, you have to start saying no to a lot more things. So for me, that's one of the big differences between the beginning and now. In the beginning, I was everywhere and anywhere I could be in order to share what I could offer in terms of what my business was providing. Now I'm getting a lot more inquiries, you know, a lot more emails coming in, DMs coming in, and that certainly takes a lot of pressure off me. But that will be the main difference between starting out and today.
What would you say is your biggest stressor compared to your early days as an entrepreneur? What worries you now versus what worried you before?
I think what worries me more now than before is probably opportunities I'm saying yes and no to. At the beginning, you have less, so you don't really have that as a stressor. But now when everything looks good, then the stressor is, did I say yes to the right thing? Did I say no to the right thing? That's probably the main stressor now, because I also know I cannot do everything. You know, if I want to spend time with my family, if I want to see my daughter grow and, you know, reset, recharge and re-energize throughout the year, I have to be very strict with how I spend my time and energy. And so the stressor is reflecting back and thinking, maybe that was the thing that could have led to something else, or maybe that wasn't the right thing I should have said yes to. So that for me now is just kind of the decisions I'm making when it comes to opportunities.
And that sounds like a great place to be. Great problem to have. And I feel like a lot of folks will think, wow, like I wish I could be in that stage where I could have the luxury of choosing which opportunities to say no to.
Yeah.
Which leads to the question of, again, but how, Simon? How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah.
And so I think the question I want to split into two parts is, if you had to share with the audience one, I guess you can say mindset shift, or one way of thinking that is really crucial that got you to where you are today, and also one more practical, whether it's like a branding related tip or a platform that worked really well for you, something more technical, what would those two needle movers be for you?
Well, I would say I will share three things, just hearing the question you put out there. The first, which is a mindset thing, is to collapse that gap between idea and execution. You have ideas all the time. When you go on holiday, when you have a conversation, when you watch a video, when you listen to a podcast. Ideas isn't the issue. The issue is the implementation of ideas. And so many of us wait so long before we actually implement those ideas. But if you can collapse that gap between getting an idea and executing on it, you're going to make far more progress than the majority. So that's the first. The second is you want to be different in how you act and think. Now, what I mean by this, and I'll give some practical examples, is you want to find ways to stand out above everyone else. So early in my journey, when I was looking to build my network, I would look to be the first to be at the event. So if an event was starting at 5 o'clock, I would be looking to get to the event for 4:20. I would want to sit at the front so I can connect with the people at the front, maybe even the speakers, because the speakers would come early to prepare and get set up for the talk. And I would also connect with the organizers, knowing that at some point I would want to speak at the event as well. And so that would be some of the things I would be looking to do to stand out. Again, my story, how I introduce myself, how I add value to others. So if I got a connection request or somebody accepted my connection request on LinkedIn, I will send a voice note. I will send a voice note to someone because, again, that would stand out compared to the majority just sending maybe a text response or not even responding at all. The third one is constantly up-leveling your environment. So constantly being around those who are challenging you to think different, who are challenging you to believe in yourself and encouraging you when things don't always work out the way you expect. So those would be the three things. Number one, collapse that gap between idea and execution. Number two, think and act different. And number three is your environment. And another example came to my head just to kind of emphasize number two again. I was at an event in the UK for the launch of one of Richard Branson's books. And somebody near the front row wrote their business pitch on a piece of paper with their name, their email, and their contact details. They folded it into a paper aeroplane and threw it at Richard Branson. And he actually read it and said his team will review the business pitch. How do you stand out? You've got to think different.
And I think this is a really nice way to start to wrap up our conversation for today, because I think, going back to the very beginning of the conversation when we talked about how you transcend your title, and just in the past few minutes alone, you've given me and the listeners so many ideas on how you can not just be boxed in by what you do, but really think about how can you really stand out. So, Simon, before I let you go for today, where can people find you or how can they work with you, and where can they get your book?
Sure. So actually one final tip that came to my head, and then I'll share how people can reach out to me, is when I talk about action throughout this conversation, One thing to also keep in mind when you think about action is the action I'm about to take going to stack the odds in my favor that I will succeed at some point? So you don't want to take just any action, because then you're just depleting your energy. You want to think about, what action can I take strategically in order to increase the odds that I will succeed? So for example, if I'm going to launch a product, or I know maybe months or years down the line, I want to start a business and I'm still in the job now, one strategic action I could take today is to build relationships with editors, journalists who write columns in newspapers, in magazines, or online media. Because when I'm ready, I've now had time to build those relationships over time. And so I'm in a much better position to say, hey, I've got this new thing I'm launching. I've got this new thing I'm producing. Would you be interested to cover it in your newspaper or your outlet? So again, when you think about action, think strategically. Is this going to help me stack the odds in my favor and increase the probability that what I want in the future has the best chance of succeeding? In terms of reaching out to me, I'm on all social media platforms. YouTube, just search Simon Alexander Ong. Instagram, my handle is @SimonAlexanderO. I'm on LinkedIn as well. And if you enjoyed this conversation, do join the newsletter, which is on simonalexanderong.com.
Amazing. And Simon, thank you for being here and for giving me a lot of insights, and obviously the listeners as well. And to our listeners, thank you as always for being here, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Edit's History featuring Simon Alexander Ong. Before we close out, let's recap 3 of my favorite takeaways from this conversation. Number 1, differentiation comes from breaking out of the box and building a brand. So Simon didn't stand out by squeezing himself into one identity, but he stood out by weaving together everything that he brings to the table: his creativity, his network, his speaking skills. And that's how you create brand experiences that no one else can replicate, such as pairing a book launch with a curated fine dining menu. And a lot of people will think that niche means cutting away anything that doesn't fit a narrow label. But in a noisy market, sameness is a real risk. Your entire range, even the skills that seem unrelated, is where the most original and memorable ideas live. So when I coach podcasters, I explain it through mixology. So your concept is like a cocktail, right? Is it a bold Negroni, a smooth old-fashioned, right? The ingredients give it character. And your positioning is like the menu. Because if everyone is serving Negronis, then why would someone pick yours? What's the garnish, the twist, the experience that makes your Negroni irresistible? And podcasting works the same way. Your concept gives your show its identity, and your positioning makes it the obvious choice in a crowded space. And when you stop trimming parts of yourself to fit the niche and instead blend your full range into the mix, you create something that no one else can copy. And that's when your podcast, your brand, it shifts from being an option to being the only choice. All right, the second takeaway is this. Your title is forgettable, but your story isn't. So early in his career, Simon would introduce himself with his job title, which is banker. But the problem is that a title puts you in the same box as everyone else with that title. It tells people what you do, but nothing else about why you do it. But when you lead with your story, the experiences, the values, the turning points that brought you here, you start to spark curiosity, right? You invite people into a conversation, not so much into a category. And in podcasting, this is the difference between saying, this is a marketing podcast versus in this podcast, I break down the campaigns that flopped and the lessons that no one else will admit. The second is a lot more specific, more interesting, and instantly signals what listeners can expect. It offers a unique angle on a familiar topic and builds instant relatability, especially if your audience shares your lived experience. So again, your title might get you labeled, but your story is what gets you remembered. Finally, takeaway number 3. Collapse the gap between idea and execution. So for many of us, the ideas aren't the problem, but acting on them is, right? So many creators let their best ideas just die in the Notes app while they wait for the right timing or the perfect setup, right? Or more confidence. But we need to shorten the time between the idea and action. And that is how you build momentum, grow skills faster, and see results sooner. So for podcasters, that could mean recording when the insight is still fresh in your head instead of overscripting it, or launching a minimum viable segment, or testing a episode concept next week instead of next quarter. Because ultimately, the faster you put your ideas out into the world, the faster you can get feedback, refine, and improve. And remember, you don't need to have it all figured out, but you just need to start before the spark fades. Sounds good? Awesome. Let's get to work. If you enjoyed the episode, well, there's more where that came from. For every episode, I share the bonus insights, strategies, and frameworks through the Annotations newsletter. It is designed to deepen your thinking and help you take action. You can subscribe to the Annotations newsletter at cheryllau.com/email. Again, the link is cheryllau.com/email.